All right, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you're joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And this May is our most epic month of all time. In addition to over 40 broadcasts just scattered throughout the month, we also have our Backyard Bio Global Nature campaign, which I know a lot of our teachers today are taking part in. This is encouraging you guys to get out, exploring the wildlife near you, sharing what you find on social media, iNaturalist, and with one another through direct classroom connections around the world. And also, in just a couple days, we begin our ever-expanding Global Biodiversity Festival. This is quite literally the largest conservation program of all time, with over 150 free broadcasts in just 4 days featuring conservationists from across the globe. So hopefully you guys have gone to the website at globalbiofest.com and registered. It's going to be a really special event. Today, of course, we are doing our last broadcast before that all gets underway with Dr. Zainab Moghal. So we have been joined by the amazing team at Environment and Climate Change Canada many times over the last years, but this is one of my favorite speakers and one of my favorite topics, so it's really exciting to bring her back today. Her work has taken her all around the world and all across Canada. She is a senior policy advisor with Environment and Climate Change Canada, and today she is going to speak to us about one of the most pressing issues of our time, climate change, how it is impacting us in Canada and across the world, and what we can do to help mitigate it. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Moghal, and take us away.
Thank you, Jesse, for the kind introduction. And as Jesse noted, I'm a senior policy advisor with the Canadian Centre for Climate Services at Environment and Climate Change Canada. And today I'll be talking to you a bit about climate change, what we're seeing in Canada, how we can adapt to its impacts, and how we can adapt, which is also one of the ways that we can take action in addition to mitigating. And I'll be explaining the differences between the two as I talk in the presentation. So I just thought I'd start off by sharing a bit about my background, and just about to go there. There we go. My slides move forward. I just thought I'd share a little bit about myself. So I've studied a few different degrees and a few different topics throughout my career. That includes studying a bit about environmental studies, environmental science, and geography. And I started my career about 20 years ago in working in environmental issues. And initially I carried out some work in Thailand and in India. And I also did some work in Northern Canada and Nunavut and the Northwest Territories. So it was interesting to take that opportunity and to see how environmental issues are handled around the world, and what are some of the similarities that we can learn. And then I went back to school and decided to learn more about climate change and how communities can take action. And this involved carrying out research in the Caribbean, in Barbados in particular, and also doing some work in the city of Waterloo that I was living in at the time, and also doing some work in Northern Ontario with Moose Factory First Nations. And as the picture at the bottom shows here, a young gentleman just sharing an image of some of the work, some of the issues that are important to him and his community around climate change. And then I went to work with some larger companies and help them to understand climate change issues in their work. And then I joined the federal government 3 years ago, where I now work to develop policies and guidance, and also work on projects on how Canadians use climate information and adapt. So the presentation that I'll be sharing with you today will talk about what climate change is more generally, how do we observe changes in the climate, what are the key impacts that we're seeing in Canada, and how adaptation can help to reduce these impacts, and also what are the ways that society and you as young folks, how you can also play a role. And then I'll be sharing some resources with you too. So climate change is basically a change in long-term weather over a period of about 30 years. And it's mostly happening right now due to human activities. So this picture here shows generally what climate change is. Basically, the sun's rays hit the earth, and some of this energy is absorbed by the earth's surface and warms it. Some of this energy is also reflected back into the atmosphere. And then some of this energy is absorbed by greenhouse gases that we're putting into the atmosphere, which then send that energy back into Earth and cause more warming. And key greenhouse gases that really play a role in this are carbon dioxide, which come from heating our homes or running our vehicles, but also other gases such as methane, which can be found in permafrost in northern parts of the country. So this warming effect is starting to cause changes around the world. And generally, what we've seen over the past 150 years, as this figure on the left shows, is that the Earth's temperature has increased by about 0.85 degrees Celsius. And within Canada over the past 7 years, we're increasing at double this rate at 1.7 degrees because we're a northern nation and we're near one of the poles, which warms at a faster rate, which I'll explain in a second. And that also means the northern parts of our country are even warming at a higher rate of 3 degrees in the past 70 years. And you can see that in the picture here, the reddish area in the western and northern part of Canada, showing the north being a more sensitive area. And to give a little bit of context, in the past 12,000 years, temperatures haven't really changed much in the Earth. They've been up maybe about 1 degree or plus or 1 degree minus. So what we're seeing right now is a fairly high degree of warming in a shorter period of time. And we are seeing this warming through many changes, including melting sea ice that we've seen over the past 30 years. For instance, this figure on the left here shows sea ice over the northern areas of the Northern Pole from 1985 to 2018 and how it's really melted quite a bit. And also, we're using this type of evidence based also with evidence that we're seeing from First Nations, Indigenous, Inuit and Métis communities too, because they spend a lot of time on the land and also observing these changes. So we're seeing a lot of signs that these changes are happening. So I thought I would share with you a little video that the Government of Canada has produced, kind of in a snapshot explaining what climate change is. So I'll let Jessie share that with you, and then we'll just come back to my presentation.
About climate change. But what is our climate, and why is it changing? Our climate is the Earth's normal weather over a very long time. It usually takes hundreds or thousands of years for the climate to change. But recently, our climate has been changing much faster. All these changes make life harder for our plants, animals, and for people around the world. And the biggest cause of climate change is humans, including you and me. When we use fuel like oil and gasoline, or remove forests to make room for cities or farms, we release greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. These greenhouse gases cause our climate to get warmer. Normally, when the heat from the sun warms our planet, some of the heat reflects back into space. But greenhouse gases act like a big blanket, holding some of it in. This extra heat can cause all sorts of problems for our planet, and the plants, animals, and people who live here. Our ice and snow are melting faster. Our oceans are getting warmer and higher, and our weather is becoming more extreme, with more heat waves, heavy rainfalls, and powerful hurricanes. Luckily, many countries around the world are working together to fight climate change. And there are lots of easy ways you and I can help too, like reusing things instead of throwing them out. Instead of driving, ride your bike or take the bus. Use less electricity and eat food grown closer to home. You and I, we can make a difference. We can fight climate change.
So thank you for sharing that. I hope you found that interesting. And I'll talk a bit more about different actions that we can take to help us also adapt to the changing impacts. So moving to my next slide, I thought I'd share with you different ways that we can observe the changes that we're seeing, and two different websites that I wanted to share with you. When we obtain information on observing climate change, this is information that can help us to understand the past weather and then understand the future changes. And when we understand future changes in the climate, this can help us to reduce impacts and adapt. So there's two websites I've noted here. One is the Climate Atlas on the left, which I'm going to give you a little demonstration of and actually have you help me find some places. Is a website that's a good place for people who are just starting to learn about changes and get information in a very introductory way. It's good for audiences like yourself. And then the Canadian Centre for Climate Services provides more technical information and more details, and that's where I currently work with my colleagues. So the Climate Atlas of Canada is a really neat website where you can read stories and learn about climate change get regional information through maps and graphs. So now I'm going to share the website with you and have you, let me just open up the main web page here. Can you all see it? Yes, you can. Great.
We sure
so
can,
this
yeah.
is the website of climateatlas.ca, which gives you an introduction as to climate science, mapping, and storytelling on the issue for Canadians. So there's a neat feature here called the map feature, where you can click on it. It's just coming. And you can go to any part of the country and get information. So, for instance, just to show you what's at the bottom here, you can learn about climate change, maybe less of it or more of it, or maybe just depending on how much you want to know, like is it what type of impact you're looking to see, what time period you want to look at, whether you want to look at the past, the present, the future, and whether you want to look at specific issues such as hot weather, cold weather, temperature, rainfall, or agriculture. So would anyone like to volunteer a place in the country that we could perhaps look at in a bit more detail?
Yeah, so I'll bring it up for our teachers live with us. If you guys want to type in the chat anywhere that jumps out, first one there gets to pick. I know we've got a lot of Ontario groups and Californians today too, so we've got Americans joining in from across the border. Our Ontario groups are all across the province, so maybe you guys want to share with me a cool spot that we can head in our climate map together. The Great Lakes. Miss Harris's class throws it up. So now, can we head to the Great Lakes and see if there's anywhere that jumps out?
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, Thunder Bay's right there on Superior.
So let's see. Maybe we'll go to St. Catharines.
We could. That's where I am today. That's pretty exciting.
How about Catharines, Jackie?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay. All right. You see, it's a little of a. Here, 1 second. Actually, let's try Chatham and see what we get there.
Cool. While you're pulling that up too, I'll bring up climateatlas.ca. I've shared this in the chat on YouTube as well. I really encourage all our teachers to check this out. It's such an amazing resource. And I know we're going to talk about something else a little later too, but climatekids.ca is also an incredible
This is going
resource.
to take too long. Maybe I want to.
This is half the fun of video calls, Zainab. Something has to go a little wrong.
It looks like it's load. Sorry?
Something has to go a little wrong in every video call.
Let me give one more second. Oh, here we go. That's right. I just wanted to show you what type of information you can get. So for instance, Chatham, which is near Windsor, you can pick, for instance, if you wanted to look at the number of 30 degrees days Celsius under more climate change, then you can, and if you wanted to look at the past to the future, then it will tell you the number of days, 30 degree days will change from 18 degrees to 43 days. So it's gone up 25 days a year. So this is the type of information that you can get on this website. It also has some really neat videos, which I won't show now, but if you wanted to go, say, into St. Catharines or other communities across Canada, you can see some of the neat videos that are shown, showing examples of how communities are preparing and adapting and trying to deal with these impacts. So that's something I just wanted to share with you. So back to my presentation, which it looks like everybody can see again. And I'll just go back to the previous slide. So another question I have for the audience, what sort of climate change impacts are you starting to see across the regions that you might live in? And this could be within Canada or even other parts of the States or other countries that have joined, and just to share a few that you might have seen.
Yeah. So again, perfect opportunity. If you're in the chat bar on YouTube and you want to share, if you're in the chat bar live with us on StreamYard, please do. I can say personally, you know, I've been in Toronto up until very, very recently, and we've been getting way more floods over the last few years. I don't really remember flooding or major rainstorms happening when I was a kid. And in the last few years, there's been every single year, there's major flooding events that cost millions of dollars in damage, and whole sections of the city they sort of have to block off to account for the fact that there's so much rainwater there. In the YouTube chat bar, we're getting warmer weather in general, which I think all of us can see. So if anyone else has any thoughts, warmer weather, we've got extra flooding. I know in our video we had the chance to hear about enhanced weather events generally. More ticks are present, so we get this change of wildlife that Ms. Braca mentioned in the chat. So great answers, guys. This is awesome.
Okay, great. So you're right. There's a whole range of impacts that we're seeing, and they really vary by the part of the country that you live in, because it really depends on our location, our geography. Canada is a very big country, so you'll see a real mix. But I've just highlighted a few here that you might have seen, and as Jesse noted, flooding is something that we are starting to see in cities in particular, and also in smaller communities. But in the cities, you'll see it due to high rainfall events, which can then affect buildings and how materials or things are transported around the city. We're also seeing more heat issues affecting cities, especially because cities have a lot of concrete in them, so they do get hotter than smaller cities. And then we're seeing changes, the changing climate affecting how animals and species migrate looking for food. And I'll talk about this just in the next slide as we move forward. So climate change can impact different types of systems, whether it's in our natural spaces, our built environment, or even our society and our economies. So this slide here talks about some of the impacts on natural systems in more detail. We are seeing insect populations could be brought in from the south, which could affect parks and forests and how their tree species could change. We're also seeing a changing climate could lead to increasing temperatures affecting the movement of wildlife and fisheries. For instance, the boreal caribou in the northern part of Canada might have to go to a new place to search for food if the vegetation has changed, or the fish that's shown in this picture, the mackerel fish population could increase if the temperatures of the water increases, or certain bird species such as the North American tree swallow could also migrate and move around to follow warmer or cooler temperatures as to search for food and habitat. And then we're also seeing impacts within society and economy. For instance, we'll see increased planning and money being spent to deal with emergencies that are linked to climate events such as flooding or fires. Also, we're seeing changes in temperature and rainfall affecting the growth of agricultural crops, which could lead to higher food prices. And then even in our tourism and recreation activities, if we see a change, we could see changes in winter sports due to less snowfall, for instance, downhill skiing or cross-country skiing. And then increasing climate events, for instance, floods, increasing the cost to protect homes from damage. And then you're going to have to spend more on insurance. And then we're seeing climate change impacts also on the built systems, as Jesse was noting, even within cities. For instance, increased rainfall could lead to impacts on our buildings, such as our homes, from flooding, or even our roads, our transit systems, such as trains or our sewers, just not being able to handle all that extra rain in the system. So there are many ways that we can take action on climate change. And to reduce the impacts of climate change, the world is trying to keep warming under 2 degrees by helping communities to do 2 things. The first is to reduce the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which is called mitigation. And that really is to support non-carbon sources of energy, such as the wind turbines shown in this picture, or helping natural systems to absorb carbon. And I'll be speaking to that in the next slide, by planting more trees. But we can also adapt, which means changing to the climate impacts, changing our behavior and how we do things to reduce the harm or get any opportunities. So that's what adaptation is. And there's a few different ways to adapt, linked to what I had said earlier about looking at nature or society or our buildings. So if we're looking at nature, one of the key ways to adapt is through nature-based solutions, which encourage nature's ability to absorb and store greenhouse gases by conserving forests or taking good practices, good land management practices of soils, wetlands, grasses, and oceans. And this supports adaptation because vegetation or plants can help to stop floodwaters from reaching homes. Trees can also provide shade and lower air temperatures in cities. And both And nature-based solutions supports mitigation and adaptation because they both also support human health and our well-being, because we all like to spend time in nature. So I have a little short video that Jesse will share on nature-based solutions that also the Government of Canada has produced. Yes, thank you for sharing that. I hope you all found that interesting, and I can take any questions at the end. So, in addition to nature-based solutions, we can also adapt how communities and how we carry out our activities. So, for instance, this first picture here talks about emergency management planning, and that involves communities at all levels, whether it's different types of government, planning and preparing for emergency events linked to climate change, for instance, storms, flooding, fires, by organizing supplies, changing how communities are designed so we can design our buildings better and have ways to support our communities and our infrastructure. Tourists can also, as shown in this picture here, change the type of activities they engage in, or the resorts can provide different types of activities. For instance, mountain coasting on hills, which are traditionally used for downhill skiing if there's less snowfall to support the downhill skiing. And also, we can adapt our agricultural methods. For instance, how we deal with less water in the soil by growing crops that grow in conditions that can handle less water. And we can also look at engineering solutions to adapt our societies. For instance, we can build sandbags to stop river waters from flooding, or build dams to control the flow of water and flooding, or build pavement that lets more water into the ground and not flood the streets. That's called permeable pavement. So are there any ways that, I have two sets of questions for you. One is how you think you could adapt within your home, and also the second question coming after this is how you think you could adapt within your community. I have some ideas here just shown by these pictures, but I just wanted to see if any of you had any ideas, and then we could just share a little bit there.
Yeah, fantastic, Zainab, and thanks again for the videos and awesome slides so far. If people on YouTube or live with us on StreamYard want to share in the chat bar, please do. I'll pass along as many answers as I can. We've got, again, a whole bevy of classrooms, and a few more joined us live, so it's a really exciting group across the continent today. So how can we adapt within our homes? I think a lot of our kids these days are doing this already. So if any kids or teachers want to share some of the solutions that they've come up with, now is your opportunity to do so, and don't be shy. We've got grow local food at home or in a community garden from Miss Harris. Great answer. We've got, what else? Anyone else want to share? Don't be shy, guys. Hour of no power. So like Earth Hour, where we turn off our lights for a little bit, give us a chance to sort of maybe focus on together time, which is kind of nice. Is there anything else that jumps out at everybody? If not, no worries. We can dive back in with the presentation.
Sure.
Yeah.
So those are all great ideas. Oh, and I see our class grew native plants with Toronto Region Conservation Association.
Nice.
Okay. So yeah, they're all great ideas and they all definitely play a role. And when we're speaking about adaptation in particular, that could involve also making an emergency plan with your community, with your family. And I will be sharing some resources on how one can do that. And that could involve working with them, your family, to prepare a list of supplies or a plan of action. If something does happen, like storm warming comes, that you have like a few days worth of food and water that are ready in case you need them. Also, protecting your home from flooding due to high rainfall, for instance, helping to water to drain away from your home, cleaning any of the eaves troughs on your roofs, getting the leaves out, and then also just plan for changing conditions. Like if it's too hot, maybe carry out some physical activity in the evening when it's cooler, making sure you're wearing a water bottle on a hot, taking a water bottle on a hot day. Or if you are in an area, as Jesse mentioned, I didn't really talk about ticks too much, but that's an insect that is also changing its location and becoming a bit more prevalent around us, different parts of Canada, but you can wear, and they're usually in taller grasses and in certain spaces, but if you're in an area where there's ticks, wear long pants, and just thinking a little bit about our behavior change. Similar to that, how you can adapt with your community, which also links to some of the ideas that some of you have mentioned. Communicating with your family, friends, and neighbors about climate change and ways you can take action. Learning more about climate risks in your community and how you could prepare. And then also supporting natural areas within your neighborhood. And I think some of you gave some examples that provide shade or flood resistance and absorb carbon. Also, like you noted, growing your own food helps you to support any changes in food supply that we might see. And also volunteering with an environmental organization to help with any efforts that are within your community. So just as I wrap up here, I wanted to share a few resources for you that I think would be helpful for folks if they'd like to get more information. There's climatekids.ca, which is a website geared towards younger children, I'd say, about action you can take and then different types of resources. And then there's a climateatlas.ca website, which I shared, which would be, I think, interesting if you had time to explore and see some of the videos and different resources that are there. Then the Government of Canada has a climate change website where they're sharing all of their work to date. And that includes a new climate action plan, which came out this past December. And I've got a picture of it here. It's called A Healthy Environment and a Healthy Economy, which has about new actions to really enhance the government's goal of achieving net zero by 2050 and really working hard to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And then more specifically on adaptation, there's different resources to support communication, taking action within your community, within your home. There's also those to support emergency planning. And then protecting your home from flooding. There's some resources by the Intact Centre on Climate Adaptation and Flood Smart Canada, which are more focused towards children and just helping them to understand flood-related risks. And that's it. So I'll welcome any questions and that you might have.
Fantastic. Well, what a fantastic presentation, Zainab. Real pleasure getting to hear from you today, showcasing so many cool resources. I said at the top of the broadcast, there's so much more to learn, so I'll be sure to bring those up for all our students as well as we get to the very, very end. But let's dive in with questions. As you said, we've got at least 13 classrooms all across Ontario, California, and beyond on YouTube, in addition to our 5 live. So well over 400 kids across the continent, and a huge welcome to all of you guys. I want to start with Miss Ayer's class. They're joining us in Toronto. If you guys want to kick us off with a question, come on in.
We'd love to kick you off. Thank you so much, Jesse and Dr. Zainab. Our class did some brainstorming because we were so excited that you were going to join us. And I think you've answered some of our questions, but we do have one right here. When did climate change begin?
Well, I mean, the climate has always changed slightly over the years, but in terms of the human, over the thousands of years, but in terms of the real human influence, that first graph I showed, the change in temperature over the past 150 years, that really started during the Industrial Revolution during the 1800s. I'd say 1850s when the world really started to use more coal to power our trains, our factories, to warm our houses, and we really started to make more things and produce more things and get more ambitious. So that's called the Industrial Revolution. And I think all the energy that went to really starting that and all the work we've done since then to really grow has been very energy intensive, and not always thinking about the long-term effects of the type of energy that we're using. And I think now, maybe over the past 30 years, and even just in the past 10 years, people are really starting to understand what the effects of the Industrial Revolution have done on the Earth's atmosphere. So, but generally you'd say that's when it started. I say the human factor.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things with climate change that I think has been one of the central messages over the last 10 years is not that the climate hasn't changed in the past, not that it hasn't even changed more in the past. It's the speed of it. In 150 years, we've gone up this degree, and that sounds small, but it's a huge impact, and we're starting to see these things around the world in a really big way. So I think that that's a great question. So thanks, Ms. Eyre, for that, for kicking us off. All right, I want to head to Waterloo to Ms. Harris's class, grade 7 there. So come on in, unmute your microphone, and you're good to go.
Hi, everybody. This has been such a wonderful experience for my class. This is a weird one, but I think you're going to love it. My class was discussing plankton, and we were discussing how there's more and more plankton and algae in our oceans because of the warming of the water. And some of my students were thinking, well, isn't this a good thing because plants absorb these greenhouse gases? And then I had some of my other students saying, no, this is a bad thing. This is increasing climate change when there's too much algae. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
So I'll speak to that generally. I mean, I'm not an expert in plankton, but I'd say generally, if there is too much growth of a certain type of vegetation in a certain water body, and it's happening too quickly, and it's not necessarily part of the natural ecosystem, sometimes the vegetation can just keep growing and growing and growing and take oxygen away or dissolved oxygen for other types of aquatic life. Or types of fish or other plants, and it's almost sort of suffocate the system. So I think that's what warming temperatures could do, is that they could encourage certain types of plants to grow. I understand the point about absorbing carbon, but I think I don't think in that type of environment that would happen. I think it's sort of the opposite effect, where it's happening too much, that it's changing the ecosystem too much, that other parts of it are suffering. So that's how I would generally frame it.
It's a great answer. It's something that was funny even back when I was in school. You'd find these stories about, oh, but there's one small good thing that's happening. The overarching story is that it's not good. It is change at a pace that is too fast to be sustainable. It's too fast for animals or ecosystems to adapt to it, and it's too fast in many cases for humans to adapt to it. So certainly there's going to be these little tiny things that are beneficial in some way or another. So I'm really glad we get that sort of debate and discussion. But again, the overarching message is that we really ought to work together to help mitigate this, because it is a serious challenge to both people and ecosystems around the planet. So thanks, Ms. Harris and your students. That was great. I want to take a quick YouTube question, and then we'll come back to our live groups heading to Ottawa in a minute. Vincent in Sacramento, Ms. Pritchard's class, wants to know, what countries are working together to stop climate change, Dr. Moghal?
Oh, many now. Many have signed the Paris Agreement on the Climate Change Accord in 2015, which was to reduce the rate of warming under 2 degrees, and Canada signed the agreement. The United States just recently rejoined the accord with the new president, Biden. China, many countries in Europe. The Paris Accord was pretty monumental because it was a more ambitious target than before, and more countries joined it than previous agreements, and now countries are really working hard to meet every year and see whether they're on track. Are they meeting? Are they working in that direction? Are there things that they need to do differently? So I'd say as a whole, there's many. I can't list them all off the top of my head, but I'd say the majority of the world's industrialized countries, but also many countries that are in the midst of still growing their economy, like India and China and other countries, who still have a lot of growth to do and still want to develop like us, but they're trying to think of ways to be more green. And if you wanted more information, you could go on the website of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, and learn more about the Paris Agreement and on the details of all the countries involved. But I'd say many are, so, which is a good thing.
Fantastic. And I'm so glad you mentioned the Paris Agreement. It really is a really game-changing enterprise that a lot of countries are engaging in together. So great question, guys. And I really do encourage our classes to check it out when they're done the broadcast. All right, let's head to Ms. Crowther's class. Unmute your mic. You guys are joining us in Ottawa. Looking very forward to your question. Come on in.
Well, thanks for having us. We're so happy to be here. We have been talking about this in class a lot, and Madison is going to ask our question for us.
Hey, Madison, welcome in.
Hi.
Hi.
If the amount of greenhouse gases continues to rise, will weather conditions become more extreme, and could weather systems combine to create intense conditions?
Yeah, great question.
Yes, very good question. And yes, the answer is yes to your questions. If we continue to put more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, we will see more intense weather. And that's why there's a real emphasis on adapting also. Like, definitely we need to remove the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, or try to stop putting more into the system. But even if we stopped today and that's it, no more greenhouse gases going into the system, it still takes many years for the Earth's atmosphere to stabilize, like 50 to 100 years for all the greenhouse gases that are currently there to, I guess, fizzle out or dissipate, or we're still going to see some impacts from whatever's in the atmosphere right now. So adaptation is still important in terms of trying to prepare for the more extreme weather and the changing climate, but we need to do that in combination with reducing our emissions. So it's a real a joint effort, and some things do both, like the nature-based solutions really supports both, but we can, there's others that also do that, and really need to think of acting in both of those areas.
I'm really glad you focused so much on nature-based solutions today. It's something that a lot of our speakers have been talking about lately, and it's something that's so exciting to note that these natural ecosystems can serve as a buffer or a mitigating agent to climate change's impacts. And so I think that it's a win for everything. It's a win for us as people. We get to enjoy these spaces, animals get places to live, and we help combat climate change. For our student in Ms. Crowther's class, if you want to check out a great example of a program talking about enhanced storms, Nick Underwood has joined us numerous times. He's a hurricane hunter. They fly planes into hurricanes and have been tracking how they get bigger over time and much more enhanced as a result of climate change. So I encourage you guys to check that out. Mr. Boccia joining us in Toronto. Come on in if you have a question for us and take us away.
Hi, I do. I'm watching with my grade sixes, and we're wondering what sparked your interest in studying climate change initially?
That's a good question. Well, when I decided to go back to school and I did my PhD actually focusing on climate change, I was living in the northern part of Canada at the time, in Nunavut and in NWT, Northwest Territories. And as I noted, the north is an area where we're seeing the impacts more strongly because it's closer to the poles, and you've got the effect of the sea ice melting and all the factors there. So I was starting to see changes myself, even though I'd only lived there a few years, but also talking to people who would live there for many years, including some of my Inuit and First Nations colleagues. So I was curious, and I noticed that there was more talk happening around our governments, whether it was federally, provincially, within cities about this issue, and there was an awareness that was growing. So I started doing some research and approaching a few professors, and I was lucky to get a scholarship to study the topic. Initially, I thought I would focus on the Arctic because I had a familiarity there. But then my professor that I chose to work with had a project in the Caribbean, and the Caribbean is another area of the world that's very vulnerable. Some parts of the world are a bit more vulnerable just depending on their location and their geography. And the Caribbean is composed of many small islands, which are vulnerable to sea level rise and coastal storms, and they're small communities, and they depend on tourism, which is a sector too, that if the weather changes, it affects how many tourists come. So he had some neat projects happening in that part of the world, and encouraged me to change my focus and study there. But there's a lot of similar types of issues in terms of how people are preparing and adapting and what they're seeing and some other strategies. So that was neat to see and kind of bring my knowledge in both of those areas.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that, sort of following your passion and ending up with a really cool career. And it's something that I think, again, a lot of our speakers on this broadcast get to share. And sometimes you end up with the most circuitous routes to end up in really cool careers. And, when I was a little kid, if I thought I wanted to be a scientist, I thought I had to get straight A's the whole way and follow one track to get there. And pretty much always that is not the case with the people we bring on this broadcast. So I think that's a beautiful message, and I hope it was inspiring for some of our kids today. Zainab, time flies and you're having fun. We are near the end of the broadcast, and so I want to share a question I think every one of our classes joining us today would have. But Miss Wilson's grade 3s want to know, what is the one best thing that we can do to help?
Oh gosh.
No pressure.
One best thing, I think, is just to continue to communicate the issue and different ways we can take action. Just talk to everybody, whether it's your neighbors, your family, your politicians. Encourage, your leadership to take action in your community, province, country, but also within your own space around you. So just communicate the issue and learn more about it. So you feel you can make a difference. Like I know it's a very daunting issue, but we can all be part of the solution. We're smart as humans. We can figure things out. We've figured things out before. So just communicate and learn, I'd say, how you can play a role.
That's beautiful. And I mean, I think what's so exciting about kids that are joining in today's broadcast is that you guys are the generation that really has grown up with this as being an issue, and as, an understanding that you can be part of the solution. You can lead the solution. I think everyone assumed my generation would be the one to sort of lead the charge against climate change, and it really wasn't. It's kids these days. It's Greta Thunberg and million child marches around the globe. And I think that's a really heartening and amazing message to think that you guys know this is an issue more than pretty much anyone in history, and are really working to make a positive difference by exactly what Dr. Moghal shared with us. Share that message, connect with each other, do your part locally, and convince as many people to do it as you, and we'll all make a difference together. So, yeah.
And I just wanted to add to that, because I often hear that too from my own kids, and it's great. Yes, obviously, the young generation has a lot of opportunity, but we need to remember that us grown-ups still have a real important role to play. And we're all collectively involved, so we all feel like it's something we should all be supporting. Because I know we don't want to sometimes, what I mean.
We're not going to push it all on the kids. Everyone needs to play a role. Everyone is playing a role. And I mean, you spoke to the Paris agreements. There's so much being done right now. It's a really exciting time. I mean, it's a daunting challenge. It's a huge challenge, but there really is a lot of collective will to make a difference with this. So I'm really glad to have the chance to share all this with you today. And again, for kids keen to learn more, climatekids.ca is an amazing resource. climateatlas.ca, and the Canadian Centre for Climate Services. So check these out. Dr. Moghal shared them in her presentation. If you want those links at the end of the broadcast, just email us and we'd be happy to get them to you. And what we do at the end of every program is, Zainab, as you know from your last broadcast with us, I'm going to bring in all our teachers to say a big thank you and goodbye. So Miss Eyre, Miss Harris, Miss Crowther's class, Mr. Baccia, join me in saying a big farewell. Have a wonderful